Hey guys, tonight we're embarking on a voyage so Victorian, it'll make you long for the comforts of modern life, like toilet paper and fresh air. We're diving into the high seas of the 19th century, where the ships were made of stubborn wood, the crew was made of even more stubborn men, and the sea was just waiting to swallow you whole. So before you get too comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you can handle the absurdity that is Victorian naval life. How many of you would make it 5 minutes before desperately wishing for a lifeboat or at least a Wi-Fi connection? Leave a comment with your location and time, because let's face it, it's probably late evening, and you should really be sleeping. Now dim those lights, turn on a fan for that soft whooshing sound reminiscent of a ship's sails, and snuggle up as if you were in one of those luxurious yet totally damp officers' quarters. Think about this. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to eat ship biscuit for weeks on end? How often did the crew really wash their hands? What were the actual chances of you being called landlubber for not knowing the difference between port and starboard? Would your stomach survive the voyage, or would you end up in a sick bay with a bucket for a best friend? And now, congratulations, you've just woken up aboard the HMS Oo in the year 1862. Watch your step. Someone just spilled last night's whale stew, and those squawking seagulls are eyeing you suspiciously. Good luck. You're looking at the ship's deck, and let's be real, this thing looks like it was built by a team of blindfolded carpenters wielding pickaxes instead of hammers. Ships in the Victorian era were made of wood so often rotten it should probably be in a compost pile rather than a vessel floating on salt water. Just how many leaks did the average ship have before it sank under the weight of its own bad design? Spoiler alert, too many. At first glance, your Majesty's ship may resemble an unkempt log raft with delusions of grandeur. It's as if the shipwrights had a contest to see how many stray nails they could hammer into a hunk of wood without checking if it'd float. The hull is constructed of planks that look like they're home to more bugs than actual humans, and you begin to question how effective those shipbuilders really were. As you shuffle toward the bow, the deck creaks ominously, sounding alarmingly similar to your grandmother's knees after a long day of bingo. Every step feels like participating in a twisted game of who can collapse first. Just stand still too long, and you might find yourself training for the Olympic event of gracefully jumping off a capsizing ship at any given moment. But don't let your imagination drift too far. The real horror is in discovering that boats from the 19th century designed their hulls with the elegance of a brick. When someone mentions sleek design, they may as well be referring to your uncle's collection of garden gnomes, clunky, awkward and ill-fitted for aquatic life. So, naturally, what do you think the crew does to stave off potential catastrophes? They dry out the wood by waving dried fish at it like that's a certified treatment plan. There, plank, just have a little more fish and pray it holds. Sure, sailors would slather tar and pitch over cracks, but who knew that health care for wooden ships involved more DIY than would make any modern homeowner cringe? And let's not talk about the fuel of choice for cooking and heating. Precisely the same combustible material that saved the ship from sinking, which ironically doesn't contribute much to morale when a fire breaks out 50 feet from your bunk. Now, speaking of morale, imagine the touchy-feely moments of daily life aboard a vessel like this. The air is thick with a delightful mix of sweat, fish guts, and whatever happens to be cooking in the galley. Spicy sea rat surprise anyone? Every meal feels more like navigating a battlefield than sharing a table. Imagine trying to find your food while dodging a spray of salt water and a loose cannon coming from the ship's hold. Welcome to your dining experience. A fantastic balancing act performed by seafarers aiming to conquer the eternal question: is it possible to eat soup off a moving table? But hold your horses. Well, don't. This ship is definitely not carrying horses. An ephemeral whisper of hope lies just beyond the horizon. Perhaps your ship could survive retirement. Imagine sending those unfortunate planks off to become fabulous wooden floors in a trendy cafe. The mix of scraped barnacles and potential hipster establishments could turn into a trendy new business model. Just enough history to podcast about it. Still, here's the kicker. The ship's design isn't just about how well it floats. It's a litmus test for the sailor's ability to juggle terror and tedium. Did you know that some ships had chapels or shrines built into their woodwork? Because nothing says, "I love the ocean," like praying for forgiveness when you hear the hull splintering in the background. Still, the committing acts of reverence could lift spirits. Ironically, those Sunday services often just turned into, "Please keep this thing above water." So keep your life vest handy while contemplating the stark reality that these ships, despite their rotting wood, memories of glorious battles and cracking hulls, served a unique function, transporting sailors and more than a few rats across the briny deep. You'll find yourself singing along to "The Ship Won't Go Down With Me" after a hearty backlog of jigsaw puzzles and bad decisions. So here you are, caught in a loop of whimsy and dread aboard this floating piece of nostalgia, if only for the wobbly wooden deck sure to keep life unexpectedly exciting, or at least offer inspiration for your next great nautical novel. Because let's face it, isn't surviving a voyage aboard a leaky, half-rotten ship just a recipe for a bestseller? It's time to get ready for some maritime melodies, and let me tell you, these shanties are less about melody and more about encouraging everyone to work harder before the captain gets angry. Picture a bunch of long-bearded sailors with pitchy voices trying to harmonise while pulling ropes that may or may not be tied to their hopes and dreams of returning home. Did they really think the dolphins appreciated their performance? You can't blame them for trying to find a silver lining amid the waves of seasickness and hanging sea rats. Shanties were the last shred of joy sailors had, like the last bite of a mouldy biscuit, which they would share only because they were starving. As you listen in, you quickly learn that they didn't have the luxury of a well-practiced choir, nor did they possess any semblance of pitch. They sounded more like a herd of cows that somehow stumbled onto a musical number and got lost among the barn. Imagine trying to lead a chorus where every contribution is equally loud and equally off-key. "Oh, haul away, my Johnny, haul away. For all the fish I've lost today, my stomach's churning anyway, so singing is just my way." Long story short, it's an abysmal mix of earnest intent and painful tunelessness, echoing off the ship's wood like a warning bell to any hapless sea creatures nearby. But what's the real incentive behind these raucous renditions? Let's start with the fact that singing a shanty kept people in sync. This isn't like a modern karaoke night where everyone pretends to be superstars for 5 minutes and fights over whose turn it is. No, this was more like a communal act of survival. When the wind was howling and the waves were crashing, shanties provided a rhythm for hauling sails and keeping the boat from capsizing. You'd be heaving on ropes, your arms feeling as if they were about to rip out of their sockets, while the guy next to you, who had likely forgotten his own name after too many rounds of rum, lustily screamed out the next line. "And when I see Mesquite Ridge, I'll tell the tale of my sea bridge." Yes, just like that, the rhythm is lost in a tuneless frenzy. But what the sailors didn't realise was that they were also losing their sanity in the process. And let's not forget about the shanty lyrics themselves, which range from the incomprehensible to the downright bizarre. Sometimes they told stories of heartbreak, loss, and long-lost lovers waiting on the shore, while other times they recounted ludicrous tales about mermaids trying to seduce them, clearly reflections of their wishful thinking. Seriously, when you start fantasizing about fish women while simultaneously battling through waves big enough to launch a ship into the next century, it's clear that your imagination is desperately trying to help. These melodies were not just meant to be sung, they were lifelines. connecting the reality of hard labour with the fanciful escape of daring adventures. Did the ears of the crew get used to the sound of off-key shanties floating across the deck? More often than not, singing became the ultimate distraction from actual work, and a way to spend 12 hours at sea without completely losing your mind. Oh, the many blisters I'll have once we dock on the shores. Take me back to drinking ale instead of screwing sails like chores. You could almost feel the camaraderie building like a slow boil, turning their exhaustion into laughter. If they weren't sharing shanties, they were likely contemplating the taste of seawater as they tried not to barf overboard after every meal. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, the tunes often turned into spirited brawls over whose rendition of Roll Boys Roll was the most genuine. It's like a competition of kwee-kwee, like Shark Tank, but for sailors and their voices. While one man belted out his version, another would mock him, forcing the next guy to up the ante, to sound like he had just been auditioned for a preferred music act. By the time evening rolled around, the captain had probably stomped into the cabin, wondering how the crew managed to create so much ruckus while lifting sails. In the end, the shanties may have been there for labour, but they became more about the connections formed under the pressure of the open sea. They tied the crew together in their shared ambitions, laughter and dreams, of returning home, of finding treasure, and of pirate confrontation success, or at least quite dramatic tales to recount back on good old land. So next time you think of questionable vocals or a sea breeze ruffling through your hair, just consider what these poor sailors had to endure for a shot at camaraderie and slightly better rations. And once again, try not to imagine the actual dolphins out there judging their harmonic tunes. Breakfast is served, well, sort of. If you can call a hard biscuit the size of a cannonball breakfast, these delightful morsels are less batter and more hazard to your dental health. Have you ever tried chewing through old bread that could double as a doorstop? Welcome to the life of Victorian sailors who are one biscuit away from mutiny over the question, is anyone else's that hard? If you think your mornings are bad when you wake up to instant oatmeal, try facing the day with a ship biscuit that could be rebranded as a very peculiar weapon. These biscuits, often referred to as hardtack, were crafted from flour, water, and if they were feeling particularly extravagant, a hint of salt. They were baked for a long time so that no self-respecting microbe would dare to call them home. The belief was, if you made them tough enough, they would survive any journey, much like the sailors themselves, perpetually on the verge of despair, but somehow holding it together. Imagine biting into a biscuit that has the texture of cement, but also, intriguingly, the taste of nothingness. Now, let's talk about the texture for a moment. It's like chewing on a lump of dried clay mixed with regret. Sailors would often spend more time trying to soften these bits of despair in their mouths than actually tasting them. How did they prepare these culinary catastrophes? Often they dunked them in coffee or water to create a horrifying sludge that somehow made it all the worse. Have you ever tried to sip tea while simultaneously considering the biscuit might just shatter your dreams of ever tasting something enjoyable again? And don't get me started on the inventory system for these precious nuggets. The sailors, strategists in their own right, quickly learned that the key to surviving a long voyage was to hoard these biscuits like a dragon with its gold. The moment the supply was low, it became a high-stakes game of bread poker. Did you stash up on the unyielding biscuits, or would you risk someone else snatching that last bit of hardtack? In a way, this flowery currency quickly became the true treasure chest of the sea. After pilot whale blubber and sea snakes make their debut during lunch and dinner, the sweet promise of dessert is often a mirage. Imagine a jar of mysterious-looking fruit soaked in seawater making an appearance after your feast. Unfortunately, it would lead most to ponder just how long the fruit had been resting. In the world of sailors, a law of thumb became, if it doesn't blink, eat it. But not every sailor was so lucky to enjoy the joys of leaning into the culinary delights offered by the sea. The unlucky ones wound up stuck in dim quarters, praying for food that doesn't break teeth or swallow them whole. They'd gaze longingly at the gaps between the biscuit shelves, scouting for the rare can of preserved meat that was hailed as a miracle by the hungry crew. Of course, that meat would come with its own set of dangers. Scurvy might be the hallmark of sailors, but watch out if you had the unfortunate fate of consuming the pre-prepared stew Chinky Port's Surprise, which could surprise you in ways you didn't wish to discover. Then there were the unforeseen partnerships formed between sailors and the rats, who seemed to relish these surroundings. With supplies so limited, it became a competition of cunning. Imagine being involved in a midnight heist to swipe rations from your bunkmate's stash, only to be thwarted by your own conscience when you hear the faintest squeak of a scurrying rodent. The rats became little reminders of the chaos that reigned on board, between the fight for food, the endless sea, and an ever-watchful captain eager to catch you with your biscuit-stuffed cheeks. So there you have it. The day-to-day saga on a Victorian vessel revolves around grains turned into leathery existences. It makes you grateful for toasters and soft-baked cookies, doesn't it? Looking back at that tumultuous time, the real unsung heroes might just be those poor sailors who genuinely held on, one hard biscuit at a time. If anything, that's the kind of steely resolve we all wish we could have bottled and brought aboard to guide us through life's more unsavoury adventures. Feeling a little green. That's the spirit, literally. Welcome to the world of Victorian naval health where seasickness is the least of your concerns. How long before you discover what scurvy actually tastes like? Spoiler, lemon juice doesn't exist here. How many hours until your stomach wishes it could jump out and swim back to shore? Oh, and let's not mention the crew who definitely shouldn't have been sharing their special brews for medicinal purposes. It is a realm where the only thing more eye-watering than the horizon is your unfortunate experience with the ship's daily ration of rancid bilge water. Picture this. You're rolling about in your cramped bunk. Try not to picture how many other sailors have occupied that very spot, while the ship sways like a drunken uncle at a wedding. You can hear the distinct sounds of your crewmates' stomachs harmonizing with the symphony of the sea. Groans, retches, and the occasional, "What did I drink last night?" It's the nautical version of roughing it, where the phrase, "I'm feeling a bit under the weather," takes on an entirely new meaning. And speaking of weather, the turbulent waters outside are giving your stomach a run for its money, as waves crash and the ship buckles like a carnival ride gone rogue. You slam your eyes shut, whispering a prayer to Poseidon to spare you from becoming the next victim of the green sickness, a term used loosely among sailors who, after enduring too many weeks without fresh produce, have started to turn an unfortunate shade. You start to ponder hardtack as a potential life choice, a biscuit so dense and lifeless that locals rumour it could withstand a nuclear apocalypse. It's been your main sustenance along with the aforementioned capsule of medicinal fluids. The only upside to developing scurvy is that it grants you a rather morbid understanding of what mouldy bread really is. It's like chewing on a cloud of disappointment. And then there are the diseases that come with close quarters that make the plague seem like just a fun summer cold. Ah yes, the inevitable arrival of the infamous ship's fever. It's basically a game of Russian roulette, where the prize is a cosy spot in the ship's holding area, which doubles as a makeshift hospital. But don't worry, the sailors will still poke their heads in to check on you, laughing between coughs. "Hey mate, it's not so bad in here. Just some minor illnesses, nothing to worry about." As if you're sharing a pint at the pub instead of being surrounded by the smell of damp clothing, old rum, and something unnameable. On these floating pestilences you might notice the peculiar arrangements. Bakers swabbing floors while broken limbs are propped next to them. The ship doctor is less of a medical professional, and more of the guy who happens to know how to put a bandage on crop rot. He has a collection of medicines that mostly involve rum, whiskey, and questionable herbal concoctions that he swears by despite the absence of any clear documentation or formal training. If you're really lucky, you might get a dose of laudanum, otherwise known as your new best friend. After all, who needs painkillers when you can numb your entire existence away? The scare tactics don't end there. When a sailor battles a really bad illness, screaming and bellowing are part of the charm. Imagine trying to sleep as someone wails for their mother, makes a desperate case for the last remaining biscuit, and vows never to drink again, all while you're precariously perched above the floorboards, hoping the next wave doesn't overturn your pitiful bunk. Now, you may think the worst fate in the world is suffering scurvy while battling fever among your bedraggled mates, but no, it gets better. Perhaps you find yourself on a ship where the men refuse to part with their private stash of salted pork. It's fine for you, they'll argue. Surely it won't do you any harm. Meanwhile, what they really mean is, I dare you to chew on this and tell the tale. Your stomach rumbles an ominous warning, but when rumbling is all you've got, you join in on the nauseous chorus of reluctant compliance, and, oh boy, does that trial of the ocean churn your memories into an epic of regret. So, whether you're keen on rolling about on lumpy hammocks, filled with collective ailments, swapping cures that could bankrupt a pharmacy, or scraping old food off the deck, welcome aboard this adventure. Adventure awaits. Or at least it would if you could stop gurgling in agony long enough to find it. The stars are your friends, or so they say. Unless you're really lost, in which case you start blaming the stars for their terrible directions. Ever tried reading a sextant while simultaneously dodging angry waves? Navigating in the Victorian era meant a lot of pointing and guessing, like a toddler trying to find his way through a candy store. Will you find your way home or end up circling the Bermuda Triangle? Imagine you're standing on the deck of the HMS O, eyes squinting skyward as you search for the North Star amidst galaxies of uncertainty. Did you notice that the crew is either sleeping on the job or have begun an existential debate over whether that cloud on the starboard side looks more like a fish or a pirate ship? Because let's face it, star navigation is not just a skill, it's an unfortunate test of endurance, patience, and maybe a little cosmic manipulation. If hot mess could be retired among sailors, you'd have a ship full of recklessly confused pupils at sea. As you squint at the sextant, you're struck by the absurdity of using a glorified protractor to measure angles between stars and the ship's horizon. Have you ever tried this at night with an overzealous wind trying to knock you off balance? It might sound like a comedic routine in a lantern-lit tavern. So, there I was, holding a metal contraption that was supposed to save my life, while half the crew insisted it would just as easily turn into a flail for angry seagulls. The truth is, reading a sextant requires more serious calculations than deciding whether hot soup or hardtack qualifies as a meal. Now, let's talk about compasses. Ah yes, the little magnetic disc leading you toward, well, somewhere. Did you ever wonder why sailors seem to never understand which direction is which? It's because compasses in the Victorian era were about as reliable as a broken clock, correct only twice a day if you're lucky. This finely tuned piece of equipment can lead you in circles just as easily, especially if someone decides to accidentally spill fish stew on it. Here's a thought. Hey, is that a menu item, or did we just lose our plot? Undoubtedly, your fellow sailors, full of bravado and easily influenced by the last slosh sailor's tale, might suggest relying on the power of the wind. But hang on, are we judging the wind now? When did wind become a sailor's gossip buddy? Sure, the gales can lead you toward land. As long as there isn't an iceberg waiting in the way, or a case of appendicitis afflicting the ship's doctor after he drank one too many rum rations. Navigating under such conditions needs strategy, patience, and a wiggle of destiny's fingers. And here comes the defining question. How often does this crew even reference maps? Those fragile pieces of paper aren't just basic, they're relics painted by long-since-turned-to-dust cartographers. Have you ever seen a sailor trying to read a creased map in rough waters? It's like watching a circus trying to juggle cucumbers while riding a unicycle during an earthquake. You're left thinking, maybe we'll all just drift toward the next horizon and establish our own pirate nation instead. Perhaps, after one particularly turbulent night, you think you've safely navigated through the choppy waters. Those waves that were once a terrifying obstacle suddenly become your best friends. After all, they're about to carry you back towards civilization, assuming you don't mistake a gentle swell for a tsunami. As morning breaks and the sun strains to shine through remnants of fog, you can finally glimpse land. Is that salvation I spy, you wonder? Just as the exhilaration of nearing land kicks in, the captain bellows, "Brain-dead swabs! That's not land, it's a mirage." And suddenly the prospect of returning to civilization becomes less of a guarantee and more of a distant hope. Welcome to life on the seas, where map reading turns into a desperate gamble instead of a practiced art. You could assemble a rock-solid crew of navigators, but you'll still probably end up in the company of dolphins or, worse, a cluster of angry jellyfish. Here lies the irony. Navigating the open sea had its unique blend of romance, chaos, and existential dread. From the glimmering stars to the ever-shifty compass, each element enhances the absurd theatre of seafaring life. So, as you take a deep breath and prepare to venture into wild waters, remember to consider the fine line between misadventure and navigational skills. Because after all, it's not about reaching the destination. It's about how entertaining your misadventures can be along the way. You might even learn to make fish stew of dubious quality while at it. Saluting the captain is one thing. Surviving his orders is another. Imagine a man who thinks shouting commands at you from the quarterdeck is the best way to motivate the crew, like a motivational speaker, but with more yelling and a greater chance of mutiny. Have you ever experienced a leader whose ideas of teamwork escalate into swabbing the decks with your bare hands territory? Welcome aboard! From the moment you step onto this ship, the captain's voice dominates the air like a foghorn in a quiet harbour. His favourite motivational technique seems to involve barking orders coupled with creative threats that would make a cat on its last 9 lives shiver with fear. It's like he's auditioning for the role of most dramatic tyrant, and is wholly committed to winning. You could call it charisma if you squint hard enough, but it's honestly more of a one-way traffic jam of intensity, where his ideas flow downwards rather than upwards. "Hoist the sails" is the common battle cry, but the truth is it quickly devolves into a game of how many times can the captain scream before someone actually starts pulling ropes. Oh, and if you've ever wondered about workplace bonding, you'll find it's like a roller coaster where the only safety bar is the threat of death from an angry captain passing back and forth, shaking his fist and asserting overly grandiose ideas about leadership. Have you ever watched a boss get mad when someone doesn't pull their weight? Try imagining that, but amplified with a salty breeze and the very real prospect of being thrown overboard if you don't jump into action immediately. The crew is a lively blend of desperate souls, each clutching their scrubbing brushes and praying to whatever gods of the sea might hear them to either save them or at least give the captain a slight case of laryngitis. You realise, if you have to compete for a little daily happiness, it's going to be between pulling off a successful operation and saying a few words about how you really feel. Spoiler alert, the captain won't be pleased. Here's where it gets interesting. The captain doesn't do team-building exercises like you might find on land. Sure, there are some group activities, like surviving a literal storm, but they lack snack breaks and hugs. Instead, it's more about who's been scrubbing which deck the hardest. The morning after a night of raucous waves and sleepless hours is the perfect time for the captain to get chatty about team morale, while also pointing out how everyone is individually responsible for handling a paranormal case of why does it smell like dead fish down below deck? He'll gather you around, proudly proclaiming some historical sea battle he won or lost, while flickering with stories of pirates and his own victoriously embellished anecdotal adventures. That's right, lads. I outsmarted a terrifying foe named Captain Squallington and lived to tell the tale. You can only wonder what terrible decisions lead to Squallington being made the villain here, as you half listen while unconsciously plotting escape routes for the next time a storm forms overhead. The daily melodrama unfolds as the crew navigates not just the rolling waves but also the captain's unpredictable moods. 1 minute he's a stalwart hero, the next obsolete fear principles take shape as he threatens to have you elevated to the crow's nest just for missing one note on your duties. If cleaning the barnacles off the hull before grabbing some air feels like ascension on a steep learning curve, then the crow's nest is an Everest of psychological survival. Of course, everyone has their own coping mechanisms. There's Jim, who pretends he's too busy adjusting the mainsail while actually daydreaming about life back on dry land. And then there's Ted, who swears he'll win first mate if he merely rolls an eye around the captain's increasingly absurd demands. As the rising tension churns the air, fantasies about landfall become much more thrilling than they were before. Suddenly, there's more than one reason to long for fresh vegetables, which might look better than that dubious sea slop you've been eating. But wait, just as you think you can navigate away from the captain's reign of chaos, he's right there, effective even when you least expect it. He'll suddenly appear behind you as you haul a wet mop and issue a gentle reminder of your role on this ship, while gesturing dramatically toward the deck that actually could use some complimenting touch, understanding totally lost in the process. So you shrug, dive under the pressure, and engage in the heart-pulling, back-aching work that transcends a simple chore list. It's to prove your worth or face the termination of all hope like fresh air for your itchy soul. You may even find yourself building small alliances with fellow sailors in the midst of grueling work. Laughter rings through the sea spray. Did someone say another order, or a head of cabbage? Ah yes, friendship flourished under the iron fist of a tyrant who believed shouting made him king. Eventually, as the weeks drag on in tandem with the desires for land, you'll realise this ship has become home, even a strange sort of family. Captain may be more villain than leader, but he's also the one steering the ship through stormy seas. Are you staying long enough to trade in laughter and loyalty for muddied loyalties and daily jokes? Only time and endless swabbing will tell. So grab a mop, breathe deep, and prepare to humour the captain's whims, turbulent as they may be. Uh-oh. Clouds are rolling in, and the sea is turning into a giant washing machine on the spin cycle. Get ready for a roller coaster of panic as waves crash around you. Does anyone even know how to secure the sails, or is this just an elaborate way to play how fast can we sink? Can you hold your stomach while trying not to become a human buoy? Just how long can you keep your breakfast biscuit inside, or will it join the fish at the bottom of the ocean never to be seen again? As the winds howl like a banshee who just stubbed her toe, you start to realise that you've traded the warmth of dry land for the choppy embrace of an abyss that seems determined to swallow you whole. And it's not just the ship that's rocking. Your entire sense of stability is getting tossed around like a rag doll at a carnival. As the crew scurries about, you can't help but notice that they look more confused than a cat at a dog show. One sailor trips over his own feet, yelling something about waves while pointing to a nearby barrel that definitely won't survive the journey. Look out! You're pretty sure that was your lunch coming back to haunt you. You glance to the smartly dressed first mate, standing tall and trying to shout orders above the cacophony. His toupee barely clings to his scalp as the winds tug at it like an infant with a scorned toy. Ever wonder how much a hairstyle matters on the high seas? Well, ask him how much he'll pay in appearances to keep that illusion afloat. You half expect him to start offering beauty tips mid-storm, as if ship shape could ever apply under these conditions. In a moment of chaos, you hear "trim the sails" shouted into the gale, creating a mental game of charades where half the crew looks as puzzled as you feel. You can practically hear Mother Nature giggling at you from over the horizon, leaving you to wonder if the storm is her idea of a cruel joke. Should you take this time to practice your crashing into waves panic face, or would that only add to your embarrassment when you inevitably lose your lunch? The only thing anyone seems adept at is shouting random commands and then running the opposite direction when a wave strikes. It's as if they believe the best course of action is simply to wish the storm away, while clinging on to any foothold that may save them from taking an unexpected swim. You feel like you should start passing out life jackets rather than following along on this ride. Congratulations, you want to yell. You've now entered the world's most ridiculous theme park. Suddenly a massive wave crashes over the bow, drenching you, from your frayed collar to your soggy socks. At least you know you weren't going to use those boots again, right? They've officially been promoted to sinking assistance rather than footwear. And as you're blown sideways, you've never felt more thankful for every hardtack biscuit you've been forced to endure. It's like that not so great relationship. You're horrific to deal with, but oh, how I'll miss you when this storm sends me flying. As the main mast creaks ominously, you cling to any semblance of sanity left. You half consider diving overboard simply to escape the churn of insanity around you. Ah, what's a little salt water and fish guts in exchange for a quick swim, you muse, but deep down, you know how disastrous that would be. Did they mention the sharks were also having a bad day? After what feels like the nautical equivalent of an eternity, the most unexpected thing happens. The storm subsides as quickly as it had come, leaving a surreal calm in its wake. There's a brief pause, where all you hear is the sound of dripping water and your heart beating in your ears, reminding you just how much you don't appreciate the sea and its mercurial moods. Fellow crew members exchange bewildered glances, the unspoken question hanging in the air, did we just survive? You can't help but laugh, a slightly hysterical sound that mingles with the fading echoes of the storm. What just happened, you wonder aloud. And amid the waves, receding into a lazy calm, you find a strange camaraderie with your shipmates. That adrenaline-fueled moment of panic turns into a shared experience, a moment where you all navigate not just the rigging, but the very essence of what it means to confront the vast unknown together. Just remember though, no one enjoys a wet biscuit, especially not on days when the seas decide to teach you lessons in humility. Never mind pirate lore, let's talk about mutiny. How do you even begin to plan an insurrection when you can barely lift your arms after a day of scrubbing the deck? Picture sailors trying to overthrow the captain, all while avoiding seasickness and trying not to lose their lunch in the process. Is it easier to just complain over hardtack or take the plunge into outright rebellion? The truth is, when morale hits rock bottom on a Victorian sea voyage, trying to incite a mutiny is about as practical as expecting a cat to enjoy a swim. You might think that finding a way to stage a coup would involve covert meetings and backroom plotting, but in reality it's more likely to look like a scrappy gathering around the galley pot, debating whether the captain's attitude is worth risking life in prison, or worse, a fatal encounter with the ship's rats. You might be surprised to learn that most sailors' motivations for mutiny usually stemmed not from dreams of gladiatorial glory, but rather from a simmering well of frustration so deep it could rival the ocean's abyss. When your dinner consists solely of ship biscuits that taste like compressed sand, and water rations are about as generous as a cat sharing its litter box, the thought of taking control becomes tantalizingly seductive. Next time you're staring at your soggy dinner, ask yourself, could I rally the troops to reclaim the galley? After all, who needs the captain's blessing when you've got a crew of disgruntled men desperate for a change? But let's talk logistics. In the tumultuous world of Victorian naval life, planning a mutiny often looked less like covert operations and more like the crew accidentally wandering into a salty brawl while trying to fetch a few more rations of rum. Did the quartermaster really mean it when he announced there'd be no more rum, or was that just his version of take a personal day? Either way, having one too many mugs of stolen grog tends to escalate conversations from, "This ship smells like a fish market," to, "I can't believe I'm risking my life for a sack of potatoes." So imagine the chaos that unfolds when too many sailors join the mutinous chorus. Suddenly, it's not just about the captain anymore. It's got the vibe of an all-out circus on the high seas. And as the crew gears up for their grand uprising, there's always that one sailor, typically the one everyone avoids because he thinks he's a combination of Napoleon and a fishmonger, wandering around, drawing on an empty barrel and trying to convince everyone that a kraken can be summoned through interpretive dance. The task becomes about whether to take him seriously, or to fashion him a makeshift hat out of old sails and hope he just entertains himself. Amid the chaos, there's also an unspoken agreement. You can run this ship better than the captain. But will anyone actually admit that before a possible trial at sea? Let's not forget the relatable angst that drives these sailors to mutiny. They've probably shared stories on long arduous nights where they filled their boots with salt water because of misplaced priorities, like not putting a plank over the hole in the bulkhead. How many ha-ha moments do these sharers of woes need before someone decides this isn't just life anymore? Perhaps mutiny is simply the only way to break the monotony or score a few days of not scrubbing the deck over the winter holidays. Maybe, just maybe, they might find camaraderie among shipmates who secretly think the captain wears the ugliest hat this side of the Atlantic. But of course, courage is always in short supply when there's the low likelihood of someone shouting, "Mutiny!" and instantly being met with the captain's wrath. The question hangs thickly in the salty air. Will they even survive that fateful moment when they proclaim their thoughts on the ship doctrine versus their personal notions of freedom? You could be met with a lovelorn sailor's affirmation shouting, "If the rats are fighting for it, then why can't we?" There's beauty in that sentiment, but sadly less beauty in the captain's reaction, which will likely lead to shouts of "to the brig" and not "join the next megaship." Eventually, after much debate, awkwardness, and probably an unconscionable number of anchor jokes, you and your fellow sailors might just topple the captain, assuming he isn't too busy hoarding all the biscuit concoctions for himself. Perhaps you'll sail into uncharted waters, promising a life of riches and happiness, or simply face your gallant demise at the hands of seagulls who have joined the fight against unnatural injustice. Either way, a legendary mutiny is bound to become more than just epic tales washed ashore. It could be the very reason you find yourself back in long-forgotten taverns trading stories where one must consider whether grabbing hardtack was worth the upheaval or just unnecessary firewood for the galley. You think your roommate's mess is bad. Picture living in a cramped space with 50 other sailors, the smell of dampness and sweat, and possibly a few rats competing for your food. Welcome to Below Deck, where personal space is a myth and privacy is just a fantasy someone shared on their second hardtack. Seriously, how do you find yourself in a situation where your bed is a pile of rotten straw? It's like being part of a human sardine can, but instead of salty fish, you're surrounded by equally salty sailors who have not bathed in weeks. The only thing lacking more than fresh air is the concept of hygiene. As you shift your weight from one cheek to the other, you're assaulted by the stench of unwashed bodies mixed with the distinct aroma of spoiled rations. Yes, that's right. You may have thought you signed up for nautical adventure, but instead, you've entered a culinary horror show. Fights over crumbs of a last week's ship biscuit often erupt like squalls on the open sea, and the only chance for a private moment. Your corner of the sleeping quarters, if you can move 5 feet without stepping on someone's beard or an aggressive rat who's apparently claimed ownership of that last flicker of candlelight. The sleeping arrangements on a ship are one of life's great mysteries. Not only do you have to contend with the mismatched snores of fellow sailors, but you're also sharing your bed with a medley of shared grievances about who stole the last drop of drinking water. It's like living in a communal college dorm, but with higher stakes and much fewer fire escapes. Imagine stretching out after a long day's work only to find out that your shoulder has accidentally become the new resting place for another sailor's sweaty sock. Good luck finding the courage to reclaim that personal space when nothing feels personal anymore, least of all your own skin. There are rules, of course, unwritten maritime codes about how not to touch the sailor next to you, keeping your public sneezes to a minimum, and definitely not bringing anything back from shore leave that's living, biting, or brazenly reminiscent of a disease. Privacy? Forget it. If you thought that being stuck with relatives in a cramped house during the holidays was bad, welcome to the nightmare of shared sleeping quarters, with individuals who've decided that personal maintenance can wait until they reach the next port. And what happens when all of this combines into the unavoidable? Chaos, my friend. Imagine an early morning wake-up call as the ship lists to one side. Now, not only are you trying to avoid the swarm of fellow sailors layered in foul-smelling clothing, but you've also got waves crashing down the hatch. You quickly learn that hold on to something sturdy is more than a mantra. It's an essential piece of survival advice while your stomach stages a protest over the prospect of another day of swaying, without the merciful promise of solid ground. Then, of course, there's the camaraderie that emerges from shared discomfort. It's like one big, dysfunctional family reunion without anyone wanting to admit why they showed up in the first place. Sure, sailors bond over swapping sea tales, but how many of those stories are about how they once got stuck between two men trying to share a single bucket when nature calls? Every experience is a test of endurance. You might end up becoming best friends, or you might just start a countdown to the next time land is sighted, whichever comes first. Let's not forget about the mates you share these odysseys with. For every salty sea dog who can spin a captivating yarn, you have those characters who think screaming at the pigeons on deck is the pinnacle of humour. They're the type of individuals who take the daily grind of chores and turn it into some mismanaged sitcom sketch, complete with pratfalls over that one stubborn rope they can't seem to untie. So, you endure, you laugh, and suddenly those fellow sailors are your makeshift family, bound together by shared hardship and a common desire to see land again, preferably a cleaner, more sanitary land. Before too long, you'll even find the humour in it. Yes, you learn to live uncomfortably with your fellow sailors, encased in a ship's belly surrounded by the incessant creaks and groans of timber under strain, making every last biscuit and overly sweetened rum ration feel like a victory. So, you push through, laughing in camaraderie, knowing that this cramped, stinky and chaotic existence is just part of life aboard the HMS Uh-Oh. Who needs a luxurious apartment when you have the blood, sweat and camaraderie deeply soaked into the lower decks of a ship that's somehow managing to stay afloat despite all odds? So strap in, because this unique journey through the belly of the ship might be cramped, sticky and absurdly hilarious. But like every great adventure, it's all about finding your groove amid the chaos, or at least figure out where to store the last of the ship's fruit before it launches into someone's cabin as an unplanned cannonball. Meet the ship's doctor. His qualifications are murky, his methods are questionable, and his sincerity can be tested by how many leeches get thrown overboard each week. Did he go to medical school or just read a book once? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where take a swig of whiskey is the medical advice you get after breaking your leg? Probably too many times in the 19th century. Picture a man with an impressive beard that looks like it's been swept up from the bakery floor and a stethoscope draped haphazardly around his neck. This gentleman is your go-to healer, and believe it or not, he might actually believe he can help. But first, he needs to ask, how many fingers am I holding up? While also possibly taking a swing at your toothache with a rusty pair of pliers. Once he's had a good look at you, he might order the classic treatment, a dose of rest, a cup of mysterious herbal concoction, and a warning about taking care of your humours. Wait, what? If you're lucky, he might also offer a bandage that has seen a good number of nautical adventures before finding its way to your wound. Sanitary conditions. Never heard of them. Imagine this doctor casually suggesting you drink from the same water source that the ship's rats frolicked in just yesterday. But hey, it's either that or the ship's notorious rum, which is often beer diluted to mimic a spirit far more respectable. Good luck deciding which might kill you first. While you're contemplating your fate, let's talk about the outbreaks of scurvy, the lovely curse of the high seas that turned sailors into walking bags of bones in no time flat. Sailors would bake under the sun, bemoaning their fate while the first mate shouted at them to man up and stop complaining. Enter your ship's doctor, who offers sage advice. You just need a little lemon juice. And if that fresh vitamin C is not available, well, he'll resort to some barrels of pickled whatever that maybe just might contain a hint of citrus. Good luck deciphering which creatures and plants will give you a fighting chance against this debilitating disease. Now, if you thought the doctor's magic list ended with scurvy, think again. Enter the realm of seasickness. Ah, yes, the delicate balance of your stomach trying to get accustomed to the waves while simultaneously reminding you of last night's dinner. Your ship's doctor might announce that nothing cures seasickness like dancing on the deck. That's right, he suggests you just jiggle it out while ropes lash around you like an octopus in search of a hug. Forget that he himself is fighting his own queasiness as he fails to maintain some semblance of dignity. With every new ailment that arises, be it a raging fever due to unsanitary conditions or an unfortunate encounter with a rogue fishhook, the doctor improvises like it's a competitive sport. His medical bag is stocked with a hodgepodge of remedies that make you wonder if he's hitting the local herbal market or thrift store for his next solution. Need a cure for your cough? Here's a potion that smells suspiciously like the floor of a barn. Is that swelling in your leg? Well, more leeches should fix it, provided you don't mind their company snuggling up to your skin. To add to the absurdity, the doctor often relies on old wives' tales, believing fervently in the power of superstition. No one is ever truly sick but merely possessed by bad spirits, so he may prescribe a bit of rum and a heartfelt prayer. Just to be safe, he'd also suggest rubbing something pungent, be it garlic, herbs, or maybe even a desperate crew member's last meal, on the afflicted area. What's better than a camphor rub right back onto that infected scar? And let's not forget about the accidents that no one can anticipate. The venture's gone wrong when the cook scalds himself on boiling water, or when a sailor gets into an accidental fistfight with the ship's railing. All the while, the doctor cheerily reminds everyone of how lucky they are not to be at war, while you wonder if the next cup of tea will come spiced with a bit of salt and regret. You realise that the next time you're feeling poorly on a ship, the only thing you might truly need is a sturdy bucket and a whimsical sense of humour. The ship's doctor may be more of a jester than a healer, but hey, at least he's entertaining. So hold on tight and remember, between you and a cast of ridiculous characters, the only prescription you really need is laughter, a touch of rum, and a prayer that the next wave isn't your last. Welcome to the world of communication, where shouting often means something entirely different than waving a flag or pointing at the directional compass. Does anyone know what "sail to the left" even truly translates to? Here, a misplaced gesture could easily spark confusion, or worse, start a full-on argument that would do more damage than any storm at sea. Imagine the scene. You're standing on the deck, surrounded by a motley crew of sailors who resemble grumpy bears more than seasoned mariners, and you can practically hear the collective toll of confusion thudding against the battered hull of the ship. To put it bluntly, the method of communication aboard a Victorian ship is more Pirates of the Caribbean and less cruise control, which is rivalled only by a game of charades played in the dark while riding a roller coaster. You'd think sailing would require an efficient system of dialogue, but alas, a successful message might depend on whether a seagull just landed on your shoulder or an errant wave splashed your fellow shipmate. If the captain shouts starboard, you're more likely to be met with blank stares than immediate compliance. You can practically hear one sailor mutter, "Does that mean to the right, or is he just angry at that fish?" Consider the captain's signs, often more cryptic than Morse code on a particularly unpleased morning. Ordinarily, ships would employ coloured flags for communication, but every sailor seems to interpret their meanings differently, making everyday commands as effective as a soggy piece of toast. You might be standing there, trying to decipher whether the captain means "hoist the sails" or "bring me my dinner," based on a colour code known only to him and his grumpy pet parrot, Squawky McSquawk Face. Frankly, you could starve before figuring it out. Have you ever been in a crowded restaurant and the server accidentally serves you someone else's meal? You think that's chaos? Try coordinating 24 hungry souls with nothing but shouting, gesturing, and the occasional threat of mutiny to communicate. For instance, firing off the command to bring in the sails before the storm hits could be misinterpreted as "throw the captain overboard," leading to a split second where you're dodging more than just waves. Usually at least two sailors would shout two different but equally intense commands, resulting in a blur of yelling and pointing that ends with all hands on deck trying not to trip over each other's feet while they contemplate the trials of living together. And then there's the inevitable game of charades that occurs after a particularly rancid batch of ship biscuits makes the rounds. The crew may not have a central psychiatrist aboard, but that does not mean their grievances go unnoticed. Shouting has its limits, and when frustrations boil over, you can expect a series of exaggerated gestures followed by a showdown that ends with someone trying to explain how they lost their last shilling in a card game. Call it seafarer theatre. There's a lot of drama, and one wrong mimed action could see you swinging from the mast instead of making sense of instructions. Let's not talk about the moments when someone spots land and starts wildly flapping their arms like a drowning chicken. That right there would leave half the crew sprinting in the opposite direction thinking the captain's lost his mind, which at this point isn't entirely improbable. Plot twists are what really keep the sailors on edge. If you ever wanted a front row seat to daily chaos, all you need is a few sailors losing their minds at each other while trying to interpret the captain's animated gestures against the backdrop of an over-caffeinated, caffeine-fueled crew. As the salt water sprays against your face and the crew continues their merry dance of misunderstanding, you quickly learn an important lesson. Actual skills in sail navigation do not necessarily translate into good communication skills. The only certainty is that whenever anyone yells, "Drop the anchor!" everyone looks at each other as if they've forgotten what drop even means. It's a simple task that devolves into one of panic before the inevitable crash of waves reminds you that sometimes just keeping the ship afloat requires more than just the ability to shout instructions. It requires a solid understanding of basic body language and the ability to adjust your expectations based on what the rest of the crew has for breakfast. So, when the storm rolls in and you're fighting for your life, not only against the sea, but the downright absurdity of crew communication. Remember, it's far better to be at sea with a shipload of miscommunication than it is to be on dry land where nobody even tries to listen to what you're supposedly saying. And that's a hidden truth of the high seas. A community bound by confusion is still a community, even if no one's quite sure what's being asked of them, or why they're all getting a beer before they navigate the next wave. Dancing through daily tasks is hard when you're knee-deep in whale oil and canvas. Chores could easily make you question life choices such as, why am I here, instead of sipping coconut water on an island somewhere? Imagine hoisting sails while simultaneously trying to dodge pigeon droppings and fish guts. A daily reality you'd never want to repeat. Ever tried scrubbing blood off a deck while pretending this was all part of the fun? Welcome to the glamorous life aboard a Victorian-era ship where every chore is a battle, and the only prize is surviving the day without losing a toe or your lunch. Let's start with the most dreaded chore, swabbing the deck. You might picture sailors having a grand old time, dancing and laughing as they scrub away. Spoiler alert, it's more like a scene from a horror film where the floor might just slide you into an abyss if you're not careful. You're armed with nothing but a mop made from rope, and hell-bent on avoiding rancid fish guts that someone graciously left behind as a parting gift. And let's not even begin to talk about the smell. Imagine washing a dog in a junkyard. Now multiply that by 10, add stale seawater, and voila! You've got the aroma of your average ship's deck. Next, we've got sail handling. Roughly the equivalent of exercise mixed with a test of faith. Have you ever tried playing tug of war with a massive flag that seems more interested in getting you tossed overboard than serving its purpose? Every time you pull, the wind gusts, and it feels like you're being flung into a cartoonish whirlpool. Meanwhile, your crewmates are cackling while you pray silently to Poseidon for just a moment of stability. You begin to wonder if this is what true grit feels like. Shivering, soaked to your bones, all you can think about is the hot soup waiting on land. A soup that's probably just as questionable as everything else you've encountered out here. Now, after the deck is scrubbed and the sails hoisted, you might be thinking it's finally time for a break. Rewind! Time to haul provisions from the hold. As the crew descends into the bowels of the ship, the air grows thick with the scent of decay, and every step feels like a mini-adventure. You're stepping over barrels, ducking beneath low beams, dodging the aforementioned pigeon droppings, and praying to the maritime gods that something does not decide to crawl up your leg. Did I mention it's pitch black down there? You fumble along, nearly shoving your face into someone's very questionable catch of the day. After successfully navigating the darkness and the smell, you finally reach the store of goods. Be prepared though. Your definition of provisions may differ wildly from the rest of the crew. Is that dried fish or just a piece of leather someone lost 2 months ago? Just so you know, both options tend to maintain a similar level of flavour, not counting the flavour of fear. Brace yourself as you shove the strangest assortment of leftovers into your satchel, utterly convinced that what you're carrying is an uncanny blend of mealtime adventure and questionable life decisions. Once your quest for food is complete, it's time to cook, or more accurately, time to avoid cooking. You see, the cook on board is often a character unto themselves, usually more familiar with black smoke and bursts of rage than any culinary skill. As you stand by the stove, a live coal of dread in your chest, you might catch a glimpse of what meat could look like, if meat were petrified and possibly breathing. Do you take the risk to consume this concoction that may or may not have been named Tridents of Despair? Spoiler. The answer is usually, why not? Now your day of chores is wrapping up as night sets in, and somehow you've survived. But wait, there's still one more thing you must do. entertain everyone's absurdly low tolerance for mundane company by sharing tales of grandeur. Everyone will gather round to engage in the rounds of, "You think that's bad?" while trying not to let their noses betray their discomfort. Grinning through it all, you realise these laborious chores bind your camaraderie, sealing friendships forged in the flames of ship-fatigued trauma. So when you finally lay down to rest, exhausted from a day of chores that felt like a dark comedic endurance test, take a moment to appreciate the absurdity of it all. You may be knee-deep in whale oil today, but at least your stories, saltier than the ocean, will continue long after the last drop of fishy stew has been scrubbed from the deck. Welcome to the high seas of the Victorian era, where daily chores are less about survival and more about proving you can still laugh, despite feeling like a grungy barnacle on the hull of life. What's better than a mutual disdain for ship biscuits binding you to a fellow sailor? Little else brings people together like shared experiences of misery, misplaced seasickness, and accidental shark encounters. When you're bonding over the threat of seasickness or nearly capsizing during a storm, it becomes a real-life understanding of we're in this together in the most chaotic way possible. After all, when you're staring down the barrel of a rogue wave, it's a lot easier to have a partner in crime, or in misery, by your side. Picture this. The sea is roaring like a toddler deprived of a nap, and you're clinging to the railing while the ship lurches like a drunkard trying to dance the waltz. The crew around you is screaming over the howling winds, not about today's menu of stale biscuits, but about something much more significant: life and death. As you spray salt water on your shipmates instead of giving them a friendly pat on the back, you start to form the kind of friendships that only arise under the duress of a perilous journey. It's like a twisted version of summer camp, except the campfire is an actual inferno being fed by the raging storm. You bond over shared glances of absolute horror as another massive wave crashes over the bow. Did we just become friends, you wonder? His seaweed-stained beard and your fresh coat of salt disguising the awkwardness of the moment. Maybe it's the bruises you both sport from flying potato sacks that once threatened to become dinner. Or perhaps it's the way you both shout and laugh madly as the ship tilts towards disaster. That's right. Nothing screams friendship quite like the threat of being hurled into the churning unknown, especially when you're both half dead from eating too much hardtack. As you brave stormy weather, the informal hierarchy on board shifts. Forget who's the navigator or the cook. Suddenly, your new friend's ability to make you laugh about the terrible putrid smell emanating from the cargo hold becomes the true treasure on this vessel. Who could have known that sharing a sardine or two could forge such an unbreakable bond? You exchange tales of home, wondering if your mothers are losing sleep over the sheer lack of hygiene aboard, or if they're thinking about turning your quarters into a cosy care package filled with freshly baked muffins. But there's a darker side too. The shared experience of facing overwhelming odds can also turn fraternal feelings into something sinister. The subtle glances exchanged the moment a sailor steals another's breakfast biscuit begin to spark a new budding mistrust. What happens when one crew member sells out the other for an extra tot of rum or a half day off? With every boat-rocking dip, you're not just defending against the elements, you're also fending off the quietly simmering pot of rapidly rising tensions. It's a high-seas soap opera where all the cast members are still sweating under the sun while the cunning episode unfolds. As the days slide by in a blur of tormenting waves and salty breezes, even the worst sailors' gripes become fodder for laughter. You know you're in deep trouble when an ugly fish looks better than your shipmate, you quip, as you all dodge rainwater pouring in through the sails. Laughter becomes the salve for the deep gashes left by endless days at sea. Friends remind each other how to keep a sense of humour when you're wading through grog-stained supplies, engaged in sword fights over turnips, and begging the heavens for a small morsel of fresh fruit that hasn't turned into a science experiment. In the end, through every storm and watery grave threat, it's the camaraderie built during those harrowing moments that truly matters. Who cares about captain's orders when you've got a shipmate who shares your questionable sense of humour about being half drowned by a particularly hostile wave? Those ships may eventually come and go, but these friendships built in the bowels of a wild ocean will last longer than your few rotten fears. So, as the ship steadies again and heads into calmer waters, you find yourself not just a sailor, but part of a crew, forged in the fiery depths of mutual struggle, bonded more tightly than any rigging on that battered old ship. And as you gaze across the deck at your sea-worn comrades, with hair as wild as the ocean, and faces lined with worry or weariness, you realise that perhaps the spirit of adventure lies not just in the destinations you chase, but in the bonds you form along the way. Yes, you could have just stayed home and watched the grass grow, but then you would have missed out on some of the best friendships where shared misfortune becomes the butt of your best sea shanties. Let's face it, the world might be filled with sharks, but you found your crew in the corners of chaos, and that's the kind of treasure worth diving into any storm for, even if it's just to cover for each other when the biscuits come out again. You may think you're safe from pirates just because you're on an unpopular vessel, but wait till you're confronted with rowdy cutthroats who believe in a share freighter policy. How prepared are you to scream hold fast while trying to avoid a sword hilt in your belly? How do you choose a pirate to negotiate with when they're all dressed similarly and smell worse than the last 14 days of repurposed fish stew? The reality is that being on the open seas, regardless of the ship you're on, means you're always one wave away from an encounter that makes your previous discomforts look like a picnic in the park. First, let's talk about pirate food, because nothing sets the mood for a high-stakes negotiation like the odour of last week's meal clinging to the crew. Imagine a band of scallywags who think a hunk of dried salted meat and a chunk of mouldy bread is a feast. It's enough to make your stomach churn at the very thought of entering into friendly negotiation, even if that just means emptying your pockets of a handful of rusty doubloons. You remember the tale of the time your captain threatened to toss some pirate into the sea, only for the crew to erupt in fits of laughter when their brave heart landed in what could only be described as a bubbling cesspool. And now you're wondering if that would be considered a reasonable warm-up for your audience. As you stand defiant on the deck with your flimsy cutlass raised, it's definitely more decor than weapon. The pirates approach, and they might as well have been wearing matching uniforms. You could practically hear the creativity behind their battle cries. "Ah! You'll give us your cargo or we'll turn this vessel into a ghost ship." Someone in the back had enabled a little too much rum imbibement, and now they sounded more like an off-tune singing group than merciless marauders ready to take your life. It becomes a game of chance. Do you negotiate? Do you try to outwit the particular pirate who seems to be sporting the biggest, most ridiculous hat, which might resemble an oversized seagull? Are you convinced that if you simply throw them a sack of potatoes and offer to share your onboard hardtack, they might let you carry on your way unhindered? Spoiler. It probably won't work, given their likely aversion to eating supplies filled with uncooked displeasure. You can't help but stare at their stained clothes, wondering if that's blood or something entirely more grotesque. They smell like they've never touched a drop of soap in their lives. You imagine how your dreams of being a swashbuckling hero have devolved into a grim realization that you're simply trying to avoid becoming a part of the ship's decor. Specifically, a piece in the pirate's trophy collection. Surely there's a legitimate reason for these scoundrels to have taken a liking to your particular ship. Probably not, but there's always the chance it could be a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity. After all, wearing an old sea captain's hat doesn't qualify you as a seasoned sailor. When they're not sharpening their cutlasses on the most worn-out barrel of pickles, they're exchanging stories that often end in more fireworks than you would expect on the high seas. It's a game of chance to see who entertains the crew with tales of their legendary exploits. Have you ever found yourself wishing you had that skill? The ability to pull a tale from thin air, a trick that could save your skin and maybe win you a drink or two. Just when you think you've outwitted them, they start demanding your ship's provisions. Sure, they could take your cargo, but they're far more interested in provisions than in a chase to the nitty-gritty. Imagine being a captive audience to pirates who think it's a riot to treat you to a blindfolded taste-testing contest involving rations that have long since passed the point of being gourmet. And the worst part, you very well could end up trying to eat something your fellow mates have unofficially dubbed mystery stew. One glance, and you'll regret ever getting involved in this escapade. Now, as they drag you along for an impromptu dinner party, you find yourself thinking, when did being held captive suddenly turn into a social hour? You laugh awkwardly at their absurdly crafted stories and then stop when the head pirate gives you the side eye, as if he expects you to pop a balloon of humour in his just-in-it-for-the-laughter world. By this point, you're just hoping to make it to the next sunrise, before your dreams of a pleasant meal are hilariously crushed beneath a fishing net of loud, gaudy brigands. All in all, sailing in the era of pirates isn't quite the adventure you signed up for. More like a chaotic ride through a never-ending carnival that smells of rotten fish, stale air, and bad decisions. But don't worry. If you can survive this mess, you deserve to toast to your bravery even if your cutlass wasn't needed after all. Because only the truly brave tackle the madness of pirate life and return with stories that may or may not involve attempting to keep a share freighter policy alive through insane culinary misadventures. What's a bath, you ask? You'll probably never see one for weeks. Welcome to the world of the Victorian sailor where cleanliness is a pipe dream. Have you ever imagined showering with a bucket of salt water in knee-deep muck? Want to talk about something even less enjoyable? This is not just trying to figure out what to do about lice that's moving into your scalp faster than you can say sailor's luck. Picture this. You wake up after a long night, the air thick enough to slice a bread roll through, only to find that your shipmates have added an invisible third layer to the ship smell. What is it? Probably a delightful blend of sweat, salt, and something that suspiciously resembles fish guts, left over from last week's catch. You might as well pour that stench into a keg and call it your new perfume, because at least it may match your hair and laundry situation. Because let's talk laundry, or, rather, the absence of it. Linen and wool were once swanky, fancy materials until sailors transformed them into grimy rags that could easily qualify as their own ecosystems. You've got shirts that haven't seen a drop of fresh water since the last time Neptune spun the wheel of fate. Good luck finding a washboard in this floating fortress of grime. The closest thing you'll get is a gentle rolling of the waves making you reconsider your life choices. Ever tried scrubbing a tunic with seawater that also has a seagull's breakfast leftovers on it? Spoiler alert, it's as effective as using a spoon to dig a tunnel. Then there's the matter of personal grooming, if you can even call it that. Every so often, the captain might declare a freshening up day, but that just means standing in a circle while a bucket of questionable water is passed around, and everyone takes a shot at rinsing off. Spoiler alert again, no one is getting clean. The water resembles what you'd expect from a muddy riverbed, but hey, it's the thought that counts, right? With no mirrors and nothing but the reflection of your shipmates' confused expressions, you get to mentally prepare for your next 4 months of sharing a cabin, while secretly wondering if that green thing on your cheek is actually algae, or just last week's ration. And let's talk about dental hygiene, or more accurately, the complete lack thereof. Do you think sailors carried around toothbrushes? Take a wild guess. Instead, you discover the complexity of dental care with just a single twig or maybe even a rag. if they remember to lift it off the floor. Chewing your way through onions like a human salad takes on new meaning when you realise that if you don't, your breath might have an ecological impact all its own. Fair warning, if you meet a fellow shipmate bearing garlic, you might not just want to keep your distance, you might want to switch ships altogether. Ah, but here comes the most glamorous part of sailing, relieving yourself. Hope you're not squirmish, because every time nature gives you a call, you get to experience the ultimate maritime roulette. If you're lucky, there's a makeshift wooden box with a hole cut out, but let's be real, it's more like an adventure game than an actual restroom. Do you crouch precariously over the edge of the ship, hoping that nobody catches a glimpse of you? Or do you take your chances and balance on a wobbly barrel? Add in the ever-present chance that a sudden wave could send you surfing into the ocean while everyone else yells overboard. Good luck getting a proper scarecrow to turn around again. In the end, all this grime, grit, and questionable hygiene practices create a curious bond among sailors, a brotherhood forged through shared discomfort. They laugh off lice infestations and smelly shirts because camaraderie is one of the only lifelines amid tempestuous waters. Each stinky sailor becomes a living testament to endurance and tenacity, proving that nothing, absolutely nothing, could ruin their morale quite like a bad voyage could. So, while you're lying in your cosy bed tonight, perhaps snuggled up in cotton sheets and breathing in fresh air, spare a thought for the sailors of the Victorian age who treated clean water like a mythical creature and had a strong stomach for adventure. They truly earned their sea legs and somehow survived with laughter, chaos, and an abundance of mud. Just remember, while history may be more entertaining when we romanticize it, those sailors were living the actual version of "you can't make this up." Keep that in mind next time you feel the urge to complain about the state of your laundry. Friendships and rivalries on deck could spiral into dramatic chaos faster than you can shout ahoy. When life at sea could easily turn into a bad soap opera, how quickly could conflicts arise over the last biscuit or who gets to use the bucket first? Do these sailors know how many rights they have? Or have they all just agreed to coexist grimly side by side in this rib-splitting reality show at sea? Navigating those waters is no simple task, and it's a delicate balance of camaraderie and constant bickering that keeps the ship afloat, sometimes quite literally. Imagine waking up every day to the sound of someone snoring next to you who smells like a blend of stale fish and regret. This is your life now, and the joys of communal living at sea quickly turn bitter. Moments of levity happen when an old salt tells a joke about pirates, until you realise they're a bit too close to home. Sailors may share tales of grandeur, but when it comes to the daily drudgery, a smirk can turn into a glare in milliseconds. Have you ever seen a group of grown men bicker over who gets to polish the captain's boots? Nothing says "I'm tough" like arguing about shoe shine in a saloon of the sea. Conflict can brew over the smallest things, like meal planning. Perhaps the cook decides to serve roasted seagull instead of boiled old boots for a change, and suddenly it's a culinary coup. You'd think they were serving golden roasted peacock with how riled up everyone gets. "How dare you serve us this muck?" a sailor might shout, dramatically clutching his stomach as if he's just been poisoned. Entertaining, isn't it? It's as if they're all auditioning for a role in melodrama on deck. Ever tried to reason with someone who's just been informed their sea biscuit privileges have been revoked? Good luck, sailor. And what about those mundane chores that lead to existential crises? Not everyone aboard is blessed with a strong back or a keen sense of duty. Some may think that swabbing the decks is merely a hobby. Thus, awful conspiracies abound. Someone suddenly loses their mop or maybe accidentally drops a barrel of fish guts on a rival sailor. It's the art of combat seen through the eyes of a jigsaw puzzle, where pieces never quite fit and the picture always ends up deformed. Have you ever reached for your only remaining biscuit only to discover your supposed friend has scarfed it down in the dead of night? Welcome to betrayal on the high seas. Of course, let's not forget the everyday romance that manages to blossom amidst the sea spray and salt water. Sailors who've spent weeks at sea forget all decorum once they hear that melodious laughter wafting from below deck. You witness love stories that develop faster than a gale-force wind, and it's not unusual to see fellows weaving them sweet nothings above the creaking timbers of the ship. But these sailor romances last only until an argument ensues over who gets the last piece of salty pork. Will true love survive stormy weather when suitors are challenged to a do-or-die debate over whose job it is to get called for more grog? Then there's the rich tradition of ship's hierarchy. It's a fun fact that everyone aboard considers themselves a brotherhood, yet not everyone's on the same rung of the ladder. Ever tried warming up to the captain or gunner? You may as well be kissing a cannonball. Mere cabin boys dare not cross paths with the ship's cook, lest they perish, and not in the fun way that sparks adventure. There's a fine line separating admiration and jealousy, especially when you overhear the whispering gossip about who stood watch and whose snoring might have cost the crew a cannonball. By the time the sun sets, the seagulls screech and the wind howls. You'll find yourself wrapped up in a mess of strange emotions as you try to navigate the complexities of ship life. The friendships formed aboard the ship are essential, a crucial lifeboat in a sea of conflict. At the end of the day, even if your companion is annoying you senseless over stove duties, he's still probably going to be the one helping you out when the ship is going down. Because in a world of growling bellies and rough waves, those bonds forged in chaos may be the strongest lines tethered to sanity. So, batten down the hatches and hold tight. The next chapter may lead anywhere from mutiny to madness, but it will always steer you right into the intrigue of human folly on the high seas. Cargo management becomes a real skill when you're trying hard not to capsize in turbulent waves. Ever tried balancing rum barrels while praying they don't burst open, sending everyone into drunken pandemonium? You could end up using that barrel as your flotation device if the ship goes down. Bonus points for being a hustler in the midst of chaos. When it comes to life aboard a Victorian ship, you quickly learn that cargo isn't just what keeps the journey interesting. It's the very reason you're floating out on this saltwater roller coaster in the first place. It's like a twisted game of Jenga, where you'd rather avoid watching things tumble overboard. Now, here's the kicker. You're not just carrying any old crates filled with random goods. No, your ship is packed to the brim with everything from spices that might bankrupt a king to exotic goods that are coveted by nobility. If you thought navigating a small grocery store was stressful, try balancing a shipment of valuable silk while simultaneously dodging rogue waves, squawking seagulls, and your crewmates' questionable hygiene habits. I mean, who decided to store the cheese right next to the fish? The smell alone could knock you into next week. As you pull out your meticulously crafted plan for stacking cargo, there's a sneaking suspicion that this might turn into a disaster waiting to manifest. Picture this. A barrel of prize spices plummets off the edge, creating a delightful cloud of fragrant chaos. Sure, everyone enjoys a little cumin in their stew, but this isn't what they had in mind. Your crewmates scramble like caffeinated squirrels, inadvertently creating an accidental dance party as they chase after the runaway barrel. Will anyone actually manage to keep their balance, or will it end in a spectacular pile-up that resembles something straight out of a slapstick comedy? Speaking of piles, let's not ignore the real villain of the cargo game, the ship itself. Say hello to the Jenny Craig of vessels. Heavy cargo means a heavy ship, and keeping that weight evenly distributed is the only way to avoid the embarrassing reality of becoming just another shipwreck statistic. Forget about an even keel. You're aiming for an even steeper tilt. Remember that time you thought it would be a good idea to board a moving train? This is basically the same idea. As you're shifting barrels and crates, the boat teeters perilously on the edge of chaos, and you wonder if you're going to have to swim back to shore under the weight of all your regret. Don't forget about securing the cargo. This isn't just a don't let the barrels roll situation. You've also got to contend with potential bandits looking to make off with your precious cargo. Imagine the scene. You're trying to ferry barrels of rum and spices while simultaneously keeping an eye out for pirates who haven't heard the term personal space. Suddenly you have to ask yourself, am I more concerned about the barrels making it to port, or do I need to fend off scallywags? That's right. On board, it's not just a game of managing cargo. It's a high-stakes action film unfolding on deck, and you're the unprepared protagonist who forgot to pack their sword. But wait, there's a plot twist. Just as you think you might survive the chaos of the day, it occurs to you that even if you manage to get the cargo to shore intact, there's still the question of actually delivering it. Will those rum barrels be bartered for treasure? Or are they destined to end up as the world's most expensive ice cream toppings at the local tavern? You can only imagine the bar staff yelling, "No more rum rations. Last time we got bombed on cargo ale, and we all paid for it." So as the waves continue their rhythmic rocking and the wind whips through your hair, you realise the transporting of cargo is no simple task. It involves a delicate balance of physics, creativity, and pure luck to make it through the journey without losing your mind and half your sanity along the way. By the time you reach land, you'll look back, laugh at the absurdity of the experience, and vow never to sign up for Cargo Duty High Seas Edition again. It's a wild ride, where the only guarantee is you'll have one hell of a story when you finally set down your grog and step onto solid ground. Welcome to the Victorian era of maritime mayhem, where managing cargo takes on a whole new meaning. As the winds howl and the waves rise, welcome to your most involuntary thriller yet. Is it a hurricane, or just your captain's breath after too many rum rations? If anxiety could manifest into corporeal form, this storm would have a name. The question becomes whether you're navigating Mother Nature's tantrums, or facing the more terrifying task of managing your fear of slipping on the old fish guts. Imagine the scene. The sky has turned an ominous shade of grey, swirling like a kettle about to boil over with hot water and some nautical nonsense. A thick mist fills the air, and the ship creaks like an old man trying to stand up after a long nap. With each wave crashing against the hull, it feels less like sailing and more like a roller coaster ride with no safety bar, and the operator just took off to grab a pint. You can barely hear your own thoughts over the roar of the wind and the chaotic shouts from the crew. How many life jackets do they even have? Are you supposed to wear them or simply hoard them like precious goldfish as the ship tips sideways? It gets real when the sails flap like a mad pigeon with no direction, and everyone is floundering, trying to shout orders over each other. Is the first mate pointing or just waving goodbye to hope? What's even worse, seeing your fellow crew members turning green and clutching their stomachs like a toddler refusing to eat peas. One minute they're shouting about the rigging, the next they're sharing heartfelt goodbyes with the seagulls above. Great. One more thing to worry about. How to avoid losing a chunk of your own integrity while they lose their lunches. You can't help but wonder, how did this trip turn from a delightful adventure into a scene out of a pirate horror film? Then, just as you're about to lose hope and consider jumping overboard for the fishes, you spot a glimmer through the storm clouds. No, it's not a passing ship or a massive pile of rum waiting to be consumed. It's the navigator, gripping onto the wheel and shouting, "Keep steady, we'll ride it out." Easier said than done, my friend. You look at the wheel, at the man squinting against the wind, and suddenly realise this is your unsung hero, a person who enjoys being splashed in the face with seawater while steering a massive wooden tub through turbulent waters. As the tide gently rocks your ship, you cling to the railing, praying for both survival and a renewal of your sanity. How did those cute little sailors from the brochure turn into grimy ocean warriors? You might be rethinking your life choices right now, pondering if you were ever meant for a life of adventure, or if staying at home with a warm blanket and Netflix was your true calling. The storm rages on, and with each crashing wave your heart races a little faster. You hear the captain's booming voice commanding everyone to brace for impact. What does that even mean? Will we also need to shout, "Help!" while we're doing it, just for good measure? The ocean mocks you, splashing icy spray into your face like a sadistic hypothermia machine, and all your well-laid plans for calm, soothing seas disappear like sugar cubes in a stormy tea. And just as despair threatens to swallow you whole, something magical happens. The storm begins to ease. The skies go from a scary shade of slate grey to a gentle pastel blue, just like the wallpaper you remember from your grandmother's living room, only a little less soothing while your heart races at 1,000 miles an hour. The crew slowly begins to emerge from their panic-induced slumber, blinking under the daylight like sunflowers stretching for their daily fix. Finally, as the ship steadies itself, the crew shares laughter, maybe a little too loud and buoyant, celebrating what seemed impossible just moments ago. Amid the chaos, you realise something profound. The storm was not just a test of endurance, but a strange bonding experience with your family of unlikely misfits. Be it a singing sailor, or that guy who audibly sipped last night's soup while on lookout, you've forged an unexplainable connection that only a ship caught in high seas could understand. In this swirling vortex of waves and fears, you've learned that storms come and go. They test your limits, but they also foster a newfound camaraderie. As you finally breathe in that salty sea breeze without tasting panic on your tongue, you reflect that nothing can truly prepare you for this wacky adventure called life, be it below deck or out amidst the crashing waves. There's more to sailing than just reaching the other side. It's about learning to dance in the rain, or at least to float with style while doing it. A fairy tale turns into fear as you wonder if mermaids are just a fabrication of sailors too long at sea, seeking solace in their own imaginations. This could lead to conversations about mermen and their questionable wardrobe choices, or decisions made in drunken camaraderie that feature interpretations of their actual appearances, nothing more than overgrown fish-flavoured fantasies. The idea of mermaids is both whimsical and terrifying when you truly dive into it, don't you think? Picture this. A crew full of burly seamen, sunburnt and exhausted, staring at a vast, empty horizon. They've been at sea for months, and suddenly, the first mate squints through the salt-crusted telescope and declares that he sees a beautiful maiden perched on a rock, singing a tune so captivating it could make even the grumpiest sailor tear up. But hold on, while they're envisioning a graceful siren, reality hits harder than a rogue wave. That's not a mermaid. That's old man Bertie playing the accordion and trying to attract the barnacles he claims are the real treasure of the sea. But it gets better. As the crew's imaginations run wild, the tales get more exaggerated. "Did you hear what happened to Andy on the last voyage?" one sailor might say, slapping a knee and laughing. "He fell overboard, and when he resurfaced, he claimed a mermaid saved him. Said she had hair like seaweed and scales that sparkled like treasure." The rest of the crew laughs, but deep down they can't help but wonder, who would be foolish enough to fall for that? Andy's story becomes the life of the ship, a warning against swimming too close to the edge. Because nothing says adventure like a slightly soggy yarn about seduction and possible scales. Meanwhile, shipmates can't resist a bit of light mischief. with significant portions of the crew convinced that mermaids are real. Practical jokers like you might find a way to capitalise on this. Why not dress up in a tattered old fishnet and a poorly crafted fin? With a bit of clever camouflage, you could easily transform into the mythical sea creature of lore. Imagine the hilarity as your friends stumble across you, mid-moan on the deck, attempting your best underwater serenade while holding a rubber fish in one hand. You might frighten a few of them, definitely provoke laughter, and, if you're lucky, earn yourself fresh biscuit rations for the next fortnight as your crew declares you the most hilarious merman on the seven seas. But really, amidst this commotion lies genuine trepidation. Less jocular seafarers might remember the legends of shipwrecks and losses attributed to mermaids luring sailors to watery graves. The very folklore that brings humour also carries the weight of dark truths. As the sun dips below the horizon, turning the sea into an ominous shade of black, the stories shift gears. No longer whimsical, the tale of mermaids transforms into ghostly whispers of souls long lost to the depths, the bittersweet reminder that many who ventured out never returned. Is that a splash in the water, or something altogether more sinister? Of course, these tall tales would eventually ascend beyond the mast of the ship. They reached distant shores, converting humble fishermen's stories into grand narratives told in taverns across the globe. Picture it, old Salty Pete at the local saltwater tavern, recanting how he once danced with a mermaid under the glowing light of a full moon, swearing she was more real than any woman on land. She sang so sweetly, he bellows. Her voice was like honey dripping over summer fruit. Then comes the wave of laughter, edging patrons towards sips of rum and disbelief, even as an eye roll accompanies it, not entirely dismissing the possibility he truly believes it. Fishermen across the world construct an identity around these myths, trading yarns built on imagination, humour, and just enough half-truth to keep the legend alive. You ponder how many mermaids there are on that floating monument of insanity known as the ship, each one swimming in the minds of sailors too long away from home. But, let's face it, in every sailor's heart beats a yearning for adventure, for escape, and maybe, just maybe, a little slice of the absurd. Mermaids were never just fishy tales. They were symbols of longing, nostalgia, and the eternal hope for the unexpected to wash up on shore. And so, as you lie in your hammock tonight, swaying gently in the sea breeze, the question remains, in this salty adventure we call life, are the mysterious creatures of the ocean merely figments of imagination, or do they lurk beneath the waves, secretly judging your quantity of hardtack versus sea shanties? Will you find romance in the depths, or perhaps wake up in the morning, shaking your head and thinking, now, that was one fishy night. After finally surviving the trip, you stumble back onto land only to greet it like a long-lost parent. The cheers sound more like, "What took you so long?" amidst you suppressing the urge to empty your bowels in public. How ignominious is returning when you have nothing left but a half-rotten ship biscuit and the lingering guilt of being unable to recognise the shore's fragrance after 2 months. And let's not forget that your clothes resemble a patchwork quilt made by a particularly careless 5-year-old. There's a strong chance the townsfolk are measuring your reputation against the scent of aged fish and sweat that have fused irreversibly in your garments. You navigate the crowd of well-wishers, eager to high-five you while avoiding the flesh-eating infection that's been clawing at your surroundings since you first set sail. A joyous reunion is happening, but it feels more like a forced advertisement for how not to travel on the high seas. Did you accidentally sign up for a carnival of calamity? The locals look at you overwhelmed, trying to gauge whether they should be celebrating your heroic return or calling the local barber surgeons for emergency care. As you inch your way past clapping hands and surprisingly festive banners, you find people reminiscing about your adventures, which are now probably more colourful than your actual experiences. Captain Scallywag, who stayed on the ship with half the crew due to unfortunate ailments, was really just too inebriated to notice he left without half the crew. Unbeknownst to you, the tales of whirling winds and monstrous waves morphed into legend. They've exaggerated your escape from a ferocious sea monster that looked suspiciously like a playful dolphin. Was the dolphin not as terrifying as you'd imagined? Or was that just a convenient excuse for not mentioning the time you vomited more than your body mass? Now you're standing on solid ground for the first time in weeks, and you start to feel something akin to a celebratory spirit, mixed with the gnawing realization that your stomach now equates home with plain bread and olives. You were just on a floating hovel, but here the locals are ready to celebrate your hard-fought battle against the sea. Maybe they'll throw a feast. Oh, wait, those fish smells? That's the banquet you're now being invited to? The menu looks suspiciously like a nautical version of what's left with a seafood twist. Your fellow sailors start recounting their own tales of daring do, explanations of the time we bravely fought a storm, and it's all rather reminiscent of a glorified game of charades. Will anyone call you out for your embarrassment of powerlessly losing your dinner while trying to gain control of the ship? Seems unlikely, as everyone is too busy toasting to non-existent bravery with cups that probably haven't seen clean water since your last perilous trip. But lo and behold, could that glimmering light in the distance actually be a tavern? You shuffle toward it, your feet just a tad unsteady from the solid footing beneath you. As you reach the entrance, it's clear you've arrived at a paradise where pirates, sailors, and landlubbers share merry tales over mugs that might as well be bottoms up to all the strange happenings of the sea. "I'll have what they're drinking," you holler, waving off all the glances of sceptical townsfolk. However, as you sit down, your excitement is quickly muted by the knowledge that your shipmates are slamming down pints of rum and ordering everything they vowed they wouldn't touch during the trip. And judging by the reactions erupting from behind you, let's just say they didn't stick to that rule for long. The party atmosphere feels more like a descent into merry madness rather than a heartfelt reunion. As the evening continues, old friends share old shanties while new friends blend tales into salacious gossip about what really went down while you were all seasick and scrambling about like drunken crabs. Are these wildly engaging stories real? Or did someone just tell half of a joke 10 times and turn it into a rumour about the Kraken? Either way, you're no longer worried about the fishy smells of the ship or that pesky ship biscuit you still haven't finished. By the time you finish your mug, the sun is setting beyond the docks, and for the first time since you stepped foot on that wretched sea, you embrace the enchantment of returning home. You raise your cup, prepare to join the raucous laughter, and possibly, just possibly, consider signing up for another voyage, maybe just off-season. You might now realise you're delighted to be back on dry land, but it's hard not to feel the motion of the ship surging up between the waves in your subconscious. Who would have thought? The real adventure isn't over. It just shifted to land, and you can't shake off that nagging feeling that you might, just might, miss the chaos of the ocean after all. Welcome to life after seafaring. When it's time to retire, becoming a shipyard labourer doesn't typically promise any hidden pearls of wisdom. Curious about what happened to those old sailor friends, follow their tales of glory, or instead, the tales of being bored senseless, recounting old fishy stories to unamused landfolk. How did they all simultaneously decide to become old men still singing sea shanties in taverns? One minute you are bravely facing storms and dodging sea monsters. The next, you're blowing dust off your fishing gear and trying not to trip over a barrel of spoiled fish. The assumptions about retirement hardly match reality. Instead of basking in the sun with a well-earned pina colada on a tropical shore, you're grappling with issues like how to replace a splintered plank and why does it smell like the inside of a boot in here? There is no mercy for the former seafarer. Instead of the jolly tales of great sea battles and buried treasures, you find yourself knee-deep in barnacles, trying to scrape a dying boat back to life while dodging the judgmental glares of fishermen who've been on land since before you joined the crew. Who knew they had such high standards for cleanliness? Speaking of fishermen, they're a different breed altogether. You'd think seafarers would bond over shared sea life experiences, but there's a perpetual battle for the title of the greatest fisherman of all time. Leave it to land people to throw a wrench in the camaraderie. Next thing you know, you're caught in competitions over whose catch from last summer's trip was bigger, or whether the storm you survived was more terrifying than the one their cousin faced. It's essentially a competition of who can embellish their tale the best, without sprouting too many fishing nets as a metaphor. And let's not share the reality of what happens when the tavern's ale starts flowing. Maybe you were a hardened sailor not too long ago, but after one too many pints, suddenly those grandiose tales about conquering the high tides are reduced to embarrassing snippets about a crab with an attitude problem and a mermaid who just wanted to borrow your hat. Sadly, there's always one guy in the corner, sloshed on rum, insisting the fish he caught had the majestic wingspan of an albatross, while others shake their heads knowingly, internally questioning how many times they'd have to hear about it before it faded into the annals of tavern lore. Remember that pirate ship you long to abandon? Well, clue number one here. The companionship of your fellow sailors isn't evaporating as easily as the last wave. They'll show up at the tavern like clockwork and proceed to recount your most embarrassing moments as if they were national treasures. You could feel your face burn red as they detail how you tripped over a plank during a heartfelt sea shanty, or how instead of spouting a wise refund from captain you yelled "starboard" when you meant "send help." You can't live it down. But you climb aboard with a square meal instead of a ship just to remind everyone that the mariner life isn't just about fish stories. As the stories unfold round after round, you can't help but wonder how you ended up here, caught between the desire for tales of adventures and the reality of telling them all over again. The irony is thick enough to cut with a rusty knife. Should I even be here, you might think, while surreptitiously seeking the comforts of your shipmates, who groan the loudest over the longest tales. How tempting it is to hearken back to the good old days of brandishing a sword over the heads of terrible mutineers, instead of explaining why your catch was this big without using your arms. And while most retired sailors stare into their mugs contemplating unanswerable questions such as, is it too late to re-enlist? Or, did I ever figure out what to do with my life after sea? There's always a spark of sailor spirit that refuses to die. You might try to remember that the life you led was extraordinary in its own right, even if it ends with the mild stench of pickled herring. There's always laughter, the kind born not from real glory but from camaraderie, all cloaked in the camaraderie of retired sailors on familiar soil. After all, every fish story deserves a grand audience, especially when you've lived a life filled with patchy conditions, salty winds, and a sloshy dose of survival against wind, tide, and the occasional angry sea monster. So, plug your ears to the taunts of reality and raise your tankard. Whether you find yourself at the shipyard or nursing your borderline mediocre ale in the tavern, just remember, retirement doesn't mean the end of the adventure. It's merely transitioning from navigating treacherous waters to weathering the stories that would make you laugh, grimace, and maybe wish for one more taste of salty sea air. Now, who's buying the next round? How do you know the sailors are getting antsy? Apart from their increasingly questionable requests for sea chantés, it's that one barrel of severely contested rum. Keeping sleeping arrangements in order becomes a daunting task to manage. Are you sharing rumours over barrels and mugs, or just trying to ignore how much someone's breath smells worse than the fish? When you're sailing the high seas with a crew, nothing creates a greater camaraderie or chaos than those precious rum rations. As the ship sways with the rolling waves, that barrel becomes the holy grail of the crew. Every sailor suddenly adopts intimate, longing expressions, staring dreamily at the wood as if it were the grand palace of a lost king. Talk about a scene. You'll see grizzled men practically swoon over rumours of when the next ration will come. Really, you might find yourself wondering whether the true captain of this ship is the captain, or if it's the rum barrel dictating moods, behaviours, and the very essence of hope on this endlessly grey sea. Already you can tell half the crew would probably swim for it if a storm revealed a crack in its wooden shell. The ship's hierarchy blurs as men of various ranks unite over their shared desire for a sip of comfort. It's like watching a group of toddlers wrestling over a lone cookie, except these men are armed, salty, and have seen things you couldn't possibly imagine. Conversations take wild turns about the merits of different brands of rum, or perhaps how much of a pirate's spirit can be bottled if you squint hard enough when tasting it. Is it the golden nectar that sends them spiralling into laughter, or merely the desperate need to forget how long it's been since they last tasted fresh land? As the crew gathers near the barrel, their resolve solidifies. Who can emerge from the depths of this ocean better off with a belly full of spirits? But here's the catch. Too much rum can inspire insubordination, transforming your fine seamen into a band of howling drunks, faster than you can say teetotaler. Before you know it, you're dealing with one sailor passionately insisting he just befriended the portrait of the captain hung on the wall, engaging in a heated debate over flag colours at 2 a.m, while another starts a rum-soaked serenade that sounds suspiciously like nursery rhymes mixed with pirate lore. Spoiler alert, it's not pretty. To maintain order, you suddenly find yourself playing the role of temporary bouncer, ushering a couple of tipsy shipmates back to their bunks, while simultaneously trying to calm down the poor guy who scolded a rat for stealing his rum-soaked rags. Odds are the rat is just here for the atmosphere and hasn't quite decided if it wants to join the conga line or simply gnaw through the leftovers of last week's vegetable stew. Every sailor knows that too much rum has led to more than just drunken sprawling. It's known to inspire drastic decisions and spur famous last words scenarios. You can almost hear the echo of one sailor claiming he could take on an entire crew of pirates single-handedly, only to wake up the next day with a hungover realisation that doing so would mean morning tea with a musket in hand. And nobody is in the mood for that. Could you survive being buzzed enough to challenge the entire crew in a fistfight just to feel brave? Or would you better off keeping one foot in reality while the rest of your mates swing their fists in a theatrical duel? Amidst the chaos of nautical insobriety, there's a down-to-earth truth. Rum isn't just a drink, it's a coping mechanism. It softens the blow of isolation, the grueling work, and the unsettling embrace of the sea. When your streak of serving squid soup to a dozen equally questionable sailors drags on, anything sweet that comes in a barrel feels like a balm for the spirit, soothing the angst that comes from being somewhere far from home and normalcy. Back to that ever-hopeful rum barrel. At every sip you witness the sheer joy. It's the shimmer of the father figure the crew desperately aches for in a harsh maritime world. Without that liquid courage bolstering the crew, it's just a matter of time until the reality of their murky fate sets in. As they sink into the solace of fellowship, however fogged up that glass may be, each soldier of the sea stands united in a brightly spun tapestry woven from laughter, camaraderie, and the shared insanity of ship life, forever linked by the haunting experiment that is the rum ration. So next time you sit with a drink in hand, remember the sea captains of the Victorian era whispering sweet nothings to their barrels, nursing spirits that buoyed them through dark waters and drudgery. Because on the high seas, where nothing but the next ration stands between you and capsizing insanity, it turns out the real gift is not just the drink, but the stories and bonds forged in the drunken tides. Let me know if you want to continue with the next segment or any adjustments. Somewhere between saltwater and superstition lies the tales of legendary sailors who might have once existed, or were merely embellishments. All joking aside, who needs books when you could craft tales of the crew's encounter with a giant kraken? Let's face it, how many can actually pass off that they battled the beast instead of whatever mundane tasks they actually completed that day? Picture this. Instead of swabbing the deck for the umpteenth time, your shipmates rally together in a raucous camaraderie and become sailors of legend. With each exaggerated retelling, the supposed truth morphs into thrilling folklore, resulting in some seriously wild spin-offs. The tale goes that one night, when the moon hung like a glowing lantern over the waves, the lookout spotted a shadowy silhouette rising from the deep. "A great sea monster," he shouted, his voice breaking the stillness like a glass bottle thrown from a ship. Naturally, it was only a wayward tree stump bobbing in the waves. But who's to quibble about such details when you can spin a yarn about colossal tentacles rising up and dragging your ship into the depths of a watery abyss? Honestly, what's more entertaining? The mundane or the extraordinary? Just imagine explaining to future generations, "Oh yes, I was part of the crew that took down the Kraken," rather than, "I once scrubbed the deck for 7 straight weeks while dreaming about bread pudding." And then there's the infamous man overboard tales, the ones that almost always hinge on a tavern discussion at the local haunt. Almost every crew has that one guy who swore he lost a leg to an equally fearsome creature of the sea. "It wasn't a shark," he'll say, and any nearby sea shanty singers will start strumming on their guitars as he proclaims, "Nay, it was a mermaid." Can you picture him standing in the dim light, proudly branding his one-legged stance as proof of his bravery? His mates nod in solemn respect while simultaneously wondering who actually fell overboard after one too many rations of burnt biscuit and watered-down rum. But let's be real for a moment. The nature of sailors is to exaggerate, like the fish they caught that was so big it could have swallowed the ship whole. Every sailor's tale grows bigger with age, creating a tapestry of legends that could dazzle even the most discerning of listeners. It's all in good fun, they say, but after a night full of briny tales and hearty laughter, you can't help but wonder where the line between truth and embellishment congregates. Is it wrong to fantasize about battles against sea monsters instead of discussing who forgot to refill the water barrel? Then there's the great treasure of the deep. Think about it. Every crew dreams of finding a sunken ship brimming with gold doubloons. The reality, however, is that most sailors are likely to find an old boot or a rusted spoon when they dive down for a good, old-fashioned treasure hunt. Still, those slender tales of the legendary galleon packed full of glittering riches keep the spirits high during long periods at sea. Everyone participates in crafting stories about that one time they found a missing treasure map tucked underneath a loose floorboard. No one cares to remember what it actually was, just that there were once whispers of greatness and vast riches waiting in the belly of the ocean. Despite the grueling daily grind of ship life, the squawking gulls, the relentless salt-flavoured breeze, and the recycled conversations about who didn't wash their socks in a month, these colourful stories keep morale afloat. Half the fun lies in the performance, the dramatic hand gestures, the mock fear as the storyteller leans in, and the laughter that rises above the din of crashing waves. Let's be honest. The tales serve not only as entertainment, but as a survival mechanism, a way for sailors to bond over shared experiences of the grotesque and mirthful. Sure, saltwater might evaporate, and a crew might eventually drift apart, but the stories stick. When the anchor is dropped, and new chapters begin. Those legendary encounters, be they with krakens, pirate ghosts, or the mythical treasure of sunken galleys, will continue to warm the hearts of those willing to listen. So, whether you find yourself with your feet firmly planted on land or still clutching the remnants of your sea legs, one thing is certain: your legacy will ultimately be your tales. And let's be real, every good seafarer knows it's all about leaving a legacy that makes even the most mundane experiences come alive with a splash of salt water and a hearty laugh. After all, wouldn't you rather be part of a saga rather than just another middle-of-the-road sailor scraping barnacles off the hull? Would you ever consider hopping back on a ship? Picture yourself picking up a hat and pretending this time it wouldn't involve sailing under absurd weather conditions or competing with bedraggled rumours over lunch? Resting your plastic seashell on the mantel might be your new calling after this. But let's be honest, after all the slime, salt, and other unidentifiable substances that caked your boots, returning to the high seas could feel like an ill-fated decision. You've spent weeks wrangling with ropes, belting out shanties that could shatter glass and dodging flying fish. You might even have a full-time job as a seasick purveyor of your own breakfast. Now, imagine standing at the dock, your once pristine tricorn hat perched jauntily on your head, as you contemplate whether it's better to look back with nostalgia or cringeworthy dread. The call of the ocean fills your ears, waves lapping against the hull, gulls screeching ominously like harbingers of doom. Ever wonder if they're telling you something along the lines of, "Stay on dry land, my friend"? You might be tempted to dive headfirst into those memories of sunburns and shipmates with questionable hygiene. But let's be frank, who would want to elevate their sense of adventure to the level of a stinky, overcrowded vessel again? Remember all the rigging you had tangled yourself in, that spectacular moment when you became one with the ship's ropes, and you came out looking more like a tuna being caught than a sailor. How many times did you hike up your sea legs, only to find you'd turned into a walking pirate joke? The thought alone can make you weak in the knees, even before leaving port. Unless you're planning to submit your name for most likely to surf the sea swells of disaster, you might think twice about that next voyage. And let's return to that fine dining experience. Rum rations and weathered biscuits served on plates that were barely rinsed out and seemed to have more in common with a barn floor than a table setting. Fancy a sandwich? Hope you didn't mind picking off the weevils while mentally planning your next trip to the best restaurant in town, which of course lies about 400 leagues north and takes 3 months of sailing to reach. Taking a bite should certainly involve a risk assessment, right? While you're at it, why not just resign yourself to feast night being every Friday when somebody mysteriously lands 2-day-old fish leftovers? Yes, that typical catch of the day still swimming in your nightmares. Let's be real though, you probably developed healthier habits just from living through it. You could put anything you learned in shipshape into self-help columns and gain fans faster than you can imagine. How to survive life in the high seas, the 12 steps to not eating your mate's last biscuit, could easily be a bestseller. Likewise, could you handle assigning roles to unqualified shipmates who boast exaggerated tales of bravery while ironically needing a week-long depression to face their next port? We're talking about others' delusions of grandeur being on par with some exotic piece of driftwood found bobbing by your starboard side that, if you believe enough, may truly change your life. But here's a thought. What if you invited old shipmates to reunite for a lesser voyage? Something like a weekend cruise, or even conquering a lake where the snacks are plentiful and the navigational tools can survive without scuffles over who won the last rum ration. Picture tiny sailboats wobbling as opposed to nightmares of monstrous storms looming ahead, all while the most treacherous thing on your horizon is a vendor selling cotton candy bigger than your regrets. In the end, would you sail another voyage? That nostalgic pull, the salty sea air tugging at your heartstrings, still exists. You can almost taste it like the last phantom bite of yesterday's fish stew. Maybe the memories have faded like a sunrise over the horizon, softened by the garden of your imagination. Or maybe the desire to conquer seas has transformed, less about sailing into tempestuous storms, and more about sailing into the shores of new adventures. For all the battles you faced at sea, there's an undeniable bond forged over shared chaos, a profound camaraderie that echoes in every laugh shared over a badly baked biscuit. So yes, even if you swear off the next expedition, perhaps there's more than a whisper in your ear saying, "Just one more adventure wouldn't hurt. Would you answer the call?" Let me know when you'd like to continue with the next section or any modifications. So listen closely. All those daily crew components become part of the ship's DNA. While serving your time aboard the HMS consider how this experience reshaped your notion of life and reality on high seas. Was it all worth it? Or next time, would you prefer to get some sleep instead? As you reflect on the legendary and alarming moments of this voyage, let's unpack just how these seafaring shenanigans might compare to your daily grind back home. Imagine waking up every morning to the gentle rock of the ship. Except, it's not so gentle when you have to get out of a bug-ridden hammock that smells oddly like a wet dog. Yes, getting tossed around like a rag doll while trying to find your sea legs can be an oscillating challenge, especially when the only thing holding up that crazy contraption called a hammock is rusty chains that squeak like tortured gulls. Life at sea brings with it a camaraderie you simply don't find in the office coffee machine line, where tension is often reduced to who stole the last donut. On the HMS the pain of shared disaster makes long-standing friendships out of any feuds you might have had over socks gone missing. Speaking of socks, welcome aboard the laundry-free lifestyle. You come to appreciate the remarkable ability of all your fellow sailors to tolerate scent wafting over from the other side of the ship, like an unwelcomed breeze. Have you ever shared a cramped living space with people who haven't showered in weeks while trying not to breathe too deeply? When you're elbow deep in rancid fish guts, soaking your oars in a brine bath becomes your social hour. How gratifying it is to trade tales of who has the most creative techniques for avoiding a bath while engaging in a friendly rivalry over who can catch the largest fish without losing an arm to the sea. That's not an exaggeration, by the way. And let's not forget about the extraordinary joys of menial labour. You must think scrubbing decks is the most exciting use of your time, right? It's as if your entire existence revolves around a ship covered in salt and grime, while the only perk is knowing your hard work will probably earn you some thrilling ship biscuits as a reward. It's the thrill of working together, however begrudgingly, united under the shared goal of keeping the ship from sinking, or at least trying not to end up in a state worse than an impromptu swim in shark-infested waters. Let's talk about the moments when you're thrown into action against those salty storms that toss your ship around like a toy boat in a bathtub. There are few things as thrilling as the storm's thunder rumbling overhead, mixed with the terror of being hurled around like dry goods in a poorly secured pantry. Welcome to Mother Nature's spinning carnival ride. You soon find that the hardest part isn't just holding tight, but witnessing your fellow shipmates turn from stoic seafarers to wide-eyed children at the world's worst amusement park. The beautiful irony lies in that these spells of insanity pull everyone together in a camaraderie that solidifies friendships faster than you can say, "Hold on to your hats, we're going down." When you finally think about making it back to solid ground, you realise just how much you've endured and survived together. The shared sea shanties echoing through your memories, the ridiculous tales of navigating life aboard the HMS that will inevitably turn into legendary stories told over mugs of cheap ale in the back of a tavern. Maybe you'll be exchanging fishtails so grand that even the most sceptical landlubbers will raise an eyebrow and think twice. Ultimately, the experience remains vivid and powerful. It changes you, instills you with resilience, makes you question everything about the comforts of land life and sleeping in a dry bed. Was it worth it, losing a little sleep to earn a wealth of unforgettable memories? You'd bet your soggy biscuit it was. Now, as you sit on firm ground while recounting your nautical misadventures, can you truly imagine a world where you didn't build bonds, face fears, and learn the profound wisdom of saltwater therapy? Perhaps your next adventure will lie not upon a swaying ship, but within the real-life reflections of friendships, forged in the complexity of human experience and sea stink. So, as your Victorian voyage fades into sleepy recollections, you might just dream of another adventure, one with far fewer rats, but equally outlandish tales to tell. Because it's not just about sailing and surviving, it's about the laughs, the shouts, and the lessons learned as you navigated the absurd sea of life. Now, rest easy, sailor. The land awaits.